we are going to have our very interesting session as people who are on this continent of Africa, which most of our countries rely on agribusiness. We are going to have someone who already has an agribusiness company here in Africa, and he's going to tell us about building an agribusiness. And I know most of entrepreneurs here in Africa in the agribusiness sector. So I'm Patrice Habinshuti, and I'm the program manager foundation in Rwanda. And here we are in interesting stuff. Michael Dehart. Dehart is the founder and CEO of East African Social Venture, which is an agribusiness company that is in Kenya. So he is, and Michael is going to ask Johnny for the agribusiness sector in Africa. So you are welcome, and our entrepreneurs are excited to actually hear from you about your journey and how practically they can build an agribusiness company for themselves. Thank you, Michael. You are welcome.
Thanks for that, Patrice, and thank you for everybody for joining today. Yeah, I have a strange journey into becoming an agricultural entrepreneur that I'll tell you about. So I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I know maybe about half the people on the call today already that I can see. So I have an unusual life in that my life is sort of half US based and half Kenyan based. So I'm originally from California, but I do have 3 young adult Kenyan children of my own who live in Kenya. And we are a Luo family from Western Kenya. So that's a little bit about us and a little bit about myself. And before I got into agriculture, I did quite a number of things, but mostly I did things that were centered around technology. So I was in market research for a long time, market research and strategy consulting in the US, as well as working across emerging markets around the world. So I ran ran the world's largest consumer technology research study for 8 years. And that program spanned 26 countries, most of which were emerging markets. So I became very familiar with emerging markets, as well as opportunities in emerging markets. To be honest, at the same time, and so a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues said to me, so Michael, this is, you've been in tech and at a very high level for a long time, right? You started your own analytics company in California. Why do you want to go be an African chicken farmer? Sounds sort of strange, right? Like, why would you go from being a managing partner of an analytics firm in California to go start raising chickens in Kisumu? People told me I was crazy. People told me that was nonsense. And people also told me, even though your idea is good, nobody's going to believe you're the right person to raise chickens in Africa. Why should some Mzungu be the one chickens in Africa, right? And so all those things were challenges. And sometimes they still are, but that's fine. It's a lot of being an entrepreneur in any sorts is turning those challenges into opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation today. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about being an agricultural entrepreneur. So first of all, I believe very much that not only is agricultural one of the largest contributors to GDP, not only in Kenya, but across all of East Africa, but I genuinely believe that Africa can be the breadbasket for the world, and that agriculture not only creates food security, but it can help with climate change. You can help improve the soil if it's done in the right way. And so there's amazing contributions that agriculture can make to humanity. You're feeding people, you're creating livelihood for people. It's all good. That being said, I know that historically there was a trend in East Africa to sort of view agriculture as kind of not sexy, right? Like, that's what our parents did, and they did that because they didn't have a choice, right? So what we want to do, right? We want to move to Kigali. We want to move to Dar es Salaam. We want to move to Kampala, to Nairobi, to these places, and have a big, exciting life getting a tech job in the city, right? Nobody wants to be in agriculture. Well, the funny thing is, actually now people are starting to return to agriculture, and I think they're realizing it can be done in a modernized way that doesn't make you impoverished for the rest of your life. In fact, when done correctly, and this is something that might shock a lot of people. Do you know that with 1 acre, I mean, really just 1 acre of land, if it is farmed in the right manner, that you can produce well over $100,000 worth of revenue every year from 1 acre of land. So more than 50% of that can be profit, by the way. You can make 50,000 US dollars profit from 1 acre of land doing agriculture. As you know, $50,000 if that was your salary, that would take quite some time to work up to that salary if you're, in Nairobi or Kigali or someplace like that. So the profit margins in agriculture can be extremely high, is to start with. So that's one of the things I think is shocking people, and I think it's why there's a return to agriculture. Now, I don't mean subsistence maize farming, right? That's not really helping anybody. But if you look at the export market for agriculture, I know people are familiar with this one, but let's look at avocados for a moment. From a Kenyan perspective, because I know that's a big Kenyan avocado market's really booming. If we look inside of Kenya, we haven't had the luxury from traveling around the world. What we see as avocados are something pretty cheap, not very special. Kenya's avocado is as big as my head, growing in everybody's yard, right? Like who cares? From an outside perspective, a small avocado, literally that will fit in the side of one of my hands, sells for 300 shillings or $3 US in the United States and Europe. Think about that. So now that product that might not have a lot of financial value in Kenya, and by the way, mangoes are the same. Those mangoes that you buy for 5, 10, 20 shillings. In the United States, a good quality mango in the season when mangoes are scarce can go for 400 shillings for one mango. So now you start to see, oh, okay, there's actually a ton of money to be made, especially when you get into exporting. And that brings me to my first big point about running a successful agricultural business. And that is that you have to know a lot more than agriculture. That may sound strange, right? But I think there is a misconception about doing agriculture that somehow it's easier than other industries, and that it's just growing things, right? Like, how hard can that be? Well, true, growing things itself isn't very hard, but if you're in agriculture, you by default, if you're going to do it successfully, that means you also have to know shipping and logistics really well. And if you're not doing the shipping and logistics yourself, you better have a reliable shipping and logistics partner. Because do you know that in agriculture, what the #1 killer of deals is in agriculture, and this is true, this is not just my opinion, it is not the price that you're setting, it is reliability of supply. So if you have whatever you're growing, whether that's animals or vegetables or fruits or whatever that may be, if you have reliable supply, you're already highly competitive, because that's the main problem for many people in agriculture. But you don't have a reliable supply if you don't have your shipping and logistics covered, right? You can have all the product in the world, all those avocados, all those chickens, but if you don't have a way to get them off your farm and get them in the hands of people that are going to consume them before they go bad, it doesn't matter. So, now let's say you just want to be an avocado farmer. Well, now you're growing avocados. Now you're in shipping and logistics. Now you have to be into business development, because you don't want to continually sell your avocados through middlemen, right? Because we know those middlemen are going to take 30, 40, 50% of the profits and squeeze the farmers themselves quite severely. So if you're going to be in agriculture, you actually have to be in a lot of other industries at the same time. You even have to be in tech to some degree. For my company, East African Social Ventures, there isn't a huge tech play for us at this time, but believe me, I am deeply involved in the agri-tech industry just because I have to know what's going on in agri-tech, and I have to know if there's an opportunity that we're not seizing, and if there's something that we could be doing better by employing technology. So that's one of the first things I would tell you about being successful in the agricultural industry is that you actually have to be in tech, you have to be in business development, and you have to be in a lot of industries at the same time. And you won't be able to, the killer for most farmers in terms of scale, believe it or not, it's not about growing enough, it's not about producing enough chickens or avocados, it's about being able to find places to sell your product, right? And here's one of the things that we found out, and this really quite honestly shocked me. So I will tell you that we did get some investor money. We got a little less, I guess about $400,000 so far. And we're now in a series of raising another round of money that will be much, much larger than that, several times that actually. But when we started looking around and looking around at poultry specifically, we found a few things, and that's that actually there are tons, as everybody knows, right? There's millions of poultry farmers across East Africa. But did you know that the ones even that have money to scale and the ones that have the resources and the land to scale, in poultry, the biggest reason they can't scale is they don't know where to sell the birds, right? It's one thing to sell 100 or 500 or even 1,000 birds live by the side of the road or even freshly slaughtered, but what do you do when you have 5,000 birds? What do you do when you have 10,000? It's now an amount that you just can't, sell them by the side of the road, right? You can't sell them at the open air markets. Like, you have to have a reliable place. You have to have somebody that's going to buy 10,000 birds a month. And what do you do about that? And so then you quickly find yourself in a problem, right? Because Nakumat, Naivas, Tuskis, all these big supermarkets, they're not going to buy your birds because what you don't have is the $250,000 you need to open a high quality slaughterhouse. And if you don't have a high quality slaughterhouse, you can't guarantee food safety standards. So now it can be great that you have those 10,000 birds, but unless you have an additional $200,000 or at least $100,000 to open a high quality slaughterhouse, you won't be able to guarantee food safety standards. So you maybe have all the money to scale in the world, but you won't be able to because you don't have a way to produce safer birds. And the same thing grows with vegetables. It could be aflatoxin that you're dealing with instead of poultry diseases, but the same issue applies in both cases. So that's another factor when you're dealing with agriculture is, and I think one of the most profound mistakes all entrepreneurs make, and this is not specific to agriculture, but it's a bigger problem, I think, in agriculture, where we have to deal with middlemen, these aggregators that buy all of our supplies and then sell them at a massive profit to supermarkets. So the problem that comes up for us in agriculture is that we have to find a way to cut that middleman out. And if we can't cut that middleman out, we're always going to be giving away the majority of the profits, right? So we have to be able to do that. And so early on, I recommend, if you're going to, and this is going to sound like a strange thing to say for something in agriculture, but early on, I will tell you, if you want to be successful in agriculture, have a really good business development person on your team. Have a really, really excellent salesperson. Because you don't have to do that, right? You continue to sell that, your produce or your birds or whatever it is to a middleman who then buys it, from 100 different people just like you, and then they make all the money, right? And so you're still left poor. But if you have that person on your side, on your team, who does the sales for you, then that middleman goes away. All those profits return to your company. So it can be really a short-sighted thing to do to not have a good sales and marketing person and business development person on board. I know agriculture is not the first company I started. When I started a market research firm in California, I originally didn't have a salesperson, thinking very arrogantly, like, I've been able to successfully sell, millions of dollars of market research and consulting services. I can do this. But the thing is, sales is just like any other skill. It's something that, if you're going to do it really well, takes a long, long time to develop. A lot more time than I think people give it credit for. And so some people even grumble about, oh, why do salespeople sometimes make so much money? I mean, believe me, even in Nairobi, there are salespeople that are not even a director level that are making well north of $500,000 shillings a month. Truly, and not even at a director level, just at a manager level. And sometimes even the higher up people can get sort of frustrated and say, like, why do these salespeople make so much money? And we had a sales guy at my company some years ago, my company in California, and the team would some of the younger staff would get really irritated, and they'd say, Michael, John is only in the office 3 or 4 days a week, maybe for 5 or 6 hours at a time. And then he leaves and, he's making tons of money. And why is that okay? And I said, my answer was, John sold $4 million worth of professional services last year. John can do whatever he wants. And if John only wants to work 20 or 30 hours a week, let's remember, John paid for a salary for 18 of us. So, that's one of the things I would recommend if you're going to be in agriculture is if you don't have the money to hire a business development and salesperson, you might have other resources that you can use to attract them, but you do want to bring that in-house as soon as possible. And so then that brings me to my next point about agriculture, and that is team. Team might seem really obvious for agriculture, right? You need some farmers, you need some people with farming skill, maybe you need somebody that knows how to drive a truck, maybe a salesperson. That's not the team I'm talking about. If you want to scale in agriculture, you will face the same businesses if you want to scale in any industry, and that is credibility. And so how do you get credibility if you're a small company just starting out? Like, how do you grow? Well, often that is done with investors, right? And so if you want to get investor money, and for us, we did need investor money right away. And like I said, we're now in a second round of investor money. You have to understand and think like investors do. And so I want to talk to you a little bit today about what investors are going to look for. So let's say you've got your land and you're doing some sales, and maybe it's not a lot, but maybe you're doing 20, 30, 40,000 US a year in sales. I know that may sound like a lot to some of you, but it's for agriculture, that's pretty small really. But you're making enough that you're able to support yourself. Once you are at a point where you have regular sales for a 12-month period, and even 6 months in some cases can be long enough, even if it's a small amount of sales, really small, if you are supporting yourself and you're supporting your business, you are likely already ready to start talking to investors. However, that's not enough. The unfortunate truth in this world is that it is pretty hard for investors. You'll find that a lot of investors, frankly, won't take you seriously if you're under 28 years old. Now, we could get irate about that and we could claim, well, that's ageist, that's discrimination. And we'd be right. It is discrimination. It absolutely is. But it is also the reality that we have to deal with. It just is. The people that write big checks sometimes they do, but generally they don't want to see only a team of people that are 28 and under on the team. It just is not enough experience. So one of the things I encourage people to do that want to scale any business, but certainly this applies to agriculture as well, is if you don't have the money to, and most people don't, especially in agriculture, right? You're probably not starting with a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of money to hire expensive salespeople, to hire a CFO, kind of these expensive sort of positions you'd want to hire for, get a good board of directors behind you, get good advisors behind you. That makes all the difference in the world. So for me, when I started speaking with investors early on, my big concern is, why would people think this white guy from California is qualified to raise chickens and kiss a milk? Right, that sounded crazy to me. And I realized I needed to find a way to make my story credible. So investors are going to look for a few things. They're going to look for a good idea. That has to be there. But do you know that even before that good idea, they want to see a good team? The team is actually more important than the idea, because you can have the best idea in the world. And by the way, this is a real thing that happens on a regular basis. If you have a good idea, but you don't have the right team, do you know that many of the less ethical investors, but this is commonplace in the investor world, will simply steal your idea and go hire a better team than you have, and totally steal your idea. And it's because they thought, well, this is a good idea, but this isn't the right person to run that. So you have to find a way to build credibility. And if you're, like I'm saying, if you're young, unfortunately, that can be pretty hard to do if you haven't had some big jobs already. So one of the ways to do that is to build a really high quality board of directors, or if you don't want to give away shares of your company, just build an advisory board. It's fine. It doesn't have to be super formal, but it does need to have people above 30 years old who have had at least director level experience, and preferably some sort of executive level experience. And that will get you credibility with investors that's will in turn lead to pretty big money pretty quickly. So that's one of the things I want to mention is the team and how important that is. And when we're talking about team, and so when I talk about team, I know another misconception is we think of team as the people that work for us as entrepreneurs. That's just not true. Your team are your investors. Your team are your paid employees too, but your team are your investors, they're your board of directors, they're your corporate advisors. All of these people are your team, and you should refer to them as your team. When you have meetings, you should say things like, hey team. People want to feel like they're part of a team. And so let's say you want to grow avocados, and let's say you're 26 years old and you have maybe some family land that was handed down through your family lineage, but you don't have a lot of credibility. Like, you're a pretty good farmer, but how are you going to get credibility? And without that credibility, how can you build a world-class board of directors? So that takes time. To build any good team takes time. And once again, that your team is everybody, right? It's your board of directors, it's your advisors, and it's your paid employees, and as well as interns for that matter. So if you were doing things for the right reason in this world, and I really believe this, I believe that if you're doing things for the right reasons and you're doing this with sort of what I think of as purity of heart, that you will find people that want to support you. Older people like me that have been in business for a long time want to see younger people also succeed. And there's thousands and thousands of people that want to see you succeed. So yeah, okay, so I know I'm talking a lot, and we have, I guess, about 15 more minutes. And I could go on and on about what it takes to start an agricultural business, but I do think that I want to highlight again how important team is. Another one of the topics that I heard today was start small. So that means starting where you can, if you don't have investor money. And then sort of think about the other parts of the business beyond agricultural that you have to manage. I think that's a real shortcoming of a lot of agricultural startups, is to pretend that they're farmers. If you're an agricultural startup, you're not a farmer. Farming is what you do as part of your business, but that is only one of many core parts of your business. And if you financial skills, get somebody on your team, whether that's an intern that's not paid, or who an advisor that's not paid, or whatever it is, get somebody on your team with financial skills. So yeah, I think we could go on, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about agricultural entrepreneurship because I love it at any time, one-on-one, and I will make myself available to do that. But those are the big things I want to leave you with right now, and before we open things up for questions, is that think about your team and think about the skill sets that you need to have that are way beyond farming, that you didn't ever expect to have. Because if you don't have those skill sets, you'll be relying and paying other people forever to do those things at a much higher price than you can do them yourself. So why don't we open up the floor for questions at this point?
Thank you, Michael. I want to thank you again for this very interesting session. It was very insightful, and it's time for question now. Maybe I have been in this session and I have some questions for you that I would like to actually ask in line with as well the topic for today, the time we are in with COVID-19 pandemic. So as someone who has an agribusiness company in Africa, what are the barriers that you see that are there to scale an agribusiness when it comes to Africa?
So yeah, so certainly right now is an unprecedented time, right? Like, who could have expected or predicted, a global pandemic that was going to wipe out, not only human lives, but wipe out stock markets and infrastructure and all sorts of other things along with it. Nobody could, right? And so it is difficult, and all rebuilding, the economies will take time, but it's happening. The good thing you have if you're an agricultural entrepreneur on your site is that, guess what? Even in a pandemic, everybody still needs to eat. And so unlike some other businesses that, really hurt in a pandemic, if you're growing avocados, I guarantee people are still eating avocados. So that's one of the things that's really, really in your benefits. The other thing, and this is one of the things so right now we actually are sort of and this is just actually news in the last 5 days, we have a very big conversation going with a very, very large, it'll be by far our largest investor ever. It's a world-class investor, and with quite a large deal in front of us. And the reason that came to and this investor, by the way, we didn't chase them down. They contacted me. And the reason they did is because agriculture tends to meet sustainable development goals. And so, I know there's a big push across all of East Africa, and certainly in Kenya, everybody's talking about the SDGs, right? Sustainable development goals. And, fortunately, for us, our organization meets 3 of Kenya's big 4 goals, although there's certainly more goals. We meet 3 of the 4 really clearly. And so then what that does for us is investors can say, oh, not only are we going to make money, but then this is free marketing for us, right? Because we're doing something really good. We're helping Kenya meet their sustainable, development goals by investing in East African social ventures. And so we're going to get money from East African social ventures, but we also get free marketing, because then we get to go tell everybody else in the world what good people we are because we invested in ESV, and we want to invest in ESV to help, Kenya meet their sustainable development goals. So anybody in agriculture should be absolutely extremely familiar with the SDGs, what they are, and how your business plan fits into them and pushes them.
Thank you very much, Michael. I really want to emphasize this, because some of these young agripreneurs then don't even know how to use these free marketing messages that they are meeting SDGs or other national or continental targets, or like the strategies of their nations. But this is very critical. I definitely invite everyone to read through the SDGs and see how their businesses are helping to meet those. And speaking about the pandemic, if it's not a secret, how was your business affected during the current times, and how you have gone to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it was really rough, to be totally honest. We were at a time when COVID started happening where we were on the cusp of a really big deal, and I'll be public about this. We were on the cusp of getting more money than we ever needed or even wanted. We had somebody approach us and wanted to write us a check for 500 million shillings, if you can imagine that. I mean, really, really did. And then we started thinking about it, and even though it was more money than we wanted, I mean, I'm not going to say no to a check like that, right? But what happened, then coronavirus happened, right? And so that deal went away really quickly, which is probably for the best anyways, because that's way more money than we need. And it would have, when you have money that you're not spending, that invites corruption. And I really believe that. So what it did for us is we are still operating in Western Kenya, but it's largely a family-run business for me right now. So, but that's not small. That means there's 17 of my family members running the business, and then, about 30 people on a part-time basis. But we had big plans to scale this year in a much, much larger way with that investor money. So what it made us do is sort of keep going on the same side. It was heartbreaking for me because I had promised people jobs. Actually, one of those people is on this call in the audience. Hi, Tony. But, so that was a little bit heartbreaking, but, it's, I think what it did for us is it gave us time. We took that time during COVID to sort of assess, okay, what would happen. So for us, what it did is it made us evaluate, this happened to humans, but what if something like this happened to poultry? how would we react to that? Like if it started to kill our flocks. And so we now have a plan for how to mitigate against large scale disease problems in poultry. So we took that time and used it wisely. And the other thing that it did is that investors saw, okay, these people were operating before COVID and now they're still here after. So they must be pretty serious and hanging together. And now, sure enough, now that, the world is starting to sort of unlock again, investors are starting to come back to us.
Wonderful, wonderful. So my last question, maybe before I get this one to you, I want to actually inform the audience that you can ask your questions through the chat box, and Michael will be responding to your individual questions. Don't miss that chance to ask someone who is already in the field. And I know most of us in Africa, we are having ideas or already running projects in agribusiness sector. So this is your chance. Please ask your question in the chat box.
Isabel might have a question.
So I don't.
I see two people have their hands up.
Hi there, Jonathan speaking.
Sure, we'll take your question and then we'll take Isabel right after you, Jonathan.
Perfect, thank you. So,
okay, you've said that Africa still needs the Sustainable Development Goal to improve its agriculture. Where can we situate our country, Rwanda, that is improving in nowadays the agriculture industry?
Yeah, so the Sustainable Development Goals, the ones I'm most familiar with are with regard to Kenya specifically. I'm sure one of the things that's an advantage for Rwanda is Rwanda is very strategic. Both the government and businesses in Rwanda are very strategic, and they have a well-developed path to evolving their whole country's economy. So what you would want to do is start doing research on if there are similar sustainable goals, development goals in Rwanda and what they are, as well as start to research what the government of Rwanda is planning for the agricultural sector. And when you start to develop that sort of level of understanding, this is a classic example of now we're into what I was talking about earlier, how we have to know a lot more than just being a farmer, right? But if you do that, and you'll pretty soon, once you develop a really good understanding of what Rwanda's government's goals is for the agricultural sector, then you will be able to find ways to align your business and your marketing efforts with that, and that will help draw investors in.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And Jonathan?
Hi, yes, thanks. So basically, you did touch on a few points that lead to the answer of this question, but can you just share any insights or thoughts on urban agriculture and the growth of more urban-centered farming, small-scale operations that then combine together as a co-op to produce as much as maybe hectares and acres and things like that?
If you see the smile on my face, it's because I was really hoping somebody was going to ask me about co-ops. Absolutely. So I'm a big fan of urban agriculture. I'm a huge fan of it. And I think we're starting to see urban agriculture take off around the world. Like that's a global trend. It's not even just an African trend. Like that is a global phenomenon. And one that's, I mean, it's got to be worth at least trillions of US dollars, if not a lot more than that. We even see businesses now growing vegetables on the roofs of their, buildings, really. I mean, this is a hot thing. And so that is a really good way, whether you're urban or rural, frankly, is to form co-ops, right? If you only have, half an acre of land, an acre of land, or something like that, it can be hard to grow, and it's hard to have buying power. And what I mean by that is when you need fertilizer and when you need your lime for your soil and all these different soil inputs, you don't need to buy, 2,000 tons at a time. And so you don't get a very good price on those things. However, if you form a co-op and you have 100 farmers and you're buying your inputs together instead of buying them independently, well, suddenly you get a much better price on everything, right? And so, you know, forming a co-op, you know, means, you know, that you can get better prices on the inputs for your agricultural products. It also means that maybe between, you know, the different organizations, it can be quite expensive to hire a really high quality sales and marketing person, because that person expects real money, because that person can make real money in a lot of industries. But maybe if you have, you know, 20, 30, 40 farms between you, you might be able to, you know, hire a sales and marketing person that will help you remove that middleman, you know, faster. So there's tons of room for co-ops, and I think, you know, I think that's something that needs to happen, for sure. And I want to be clear, like, I'm not against middlemen in farming. Like, I know Twiga Foods has taken a firm stance that they're really against middlemen and they're trying to cut it out. I have different feelings about it. I don't think those middlemen are necessarily evil, right? Like, they're just trying to put their kids through school like the rest of us, right? But it's about getting them to play fairly. And if you have, you know, the power of a co-op behind you, even if you are working with middlemen, then you get to negotiate, right? Because you are not beholden to one person. If you have, you know, 30 or 40 different people in your co-op, you can find lots of different middlemen, you know, the sort of aggregators, and then you can, rather than having them drive the price, you can start to drive the price. Because if, you know, you're instead of selling, you know, a ton of avocados, now you're selling 100 tons, but now you have a lot more leverage. And so I love this question about topics. I mean, I could talk all day about just this question about co-ops in general. So thank you for asking. I don't know if I answered your question completely, but there's tons of place for co-ops in the space of urban farming. Another thing that one of the teams last semester that we were working with had this idea to start a balcony farming business. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't want to give away somebody else's business plan. But it's another space that just has tons and tons of potential. So one of the things I think about in urban farming specifically is reimagining, as strange as this sounds, what farming means. It sounds like such a strange thing to say, like, we all know what farming is, but do
Michael, we lost you. Hello? Hello, Michael? So we lost Michael, but it was the end of the session. So we actually thank you very much, everyone. If Michael is trying to reconnect, but there were questions in the chat box that were asked. So we'll get those questions to Michael so that he can respond to you, and we'll share your names, and in your registrations we can actually connect you to him so that he can give you insights as well. Thank you so much for attending this. It was a very insightful session, and I hope that it gave you the courage to embrace agribusiness as like one of the sectors where you can build a successful business. Actually, it was very good to hear that in agribusiness you can even make more money than you can make in other sectors. So we thank you very much.